Guys, let's talk about Netflix animation. More specifically, Netflix adult animation. Netflix went from being a DVD distribution service to a massive presence in entertainment, dominating cable in recent years. It's now its very own production company producing original content, as well as being one of the main places people go to watch TV in general. Netflix is giant, and we all know this, but sometimes I forget that most people nowadays use Netflix or streaming services as their mainstream way of watching adult animated shows. Long gone are the days when Fox, Adult Swim, Comedy Central, and TBS served as the biggest representatives for the medium. As the rise of streaming has provided newer titles, some having a wider appeal, but also a lot of titles that simply would not have worked on television and can only work on streaming, especially when it comes to Netflix in particular. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at Netflix's catalog of adult animation, running through some of the well-known titles, and asking the biggest question of all, are these shows pushing adult animation in a better direction? Real quick guys, I just want to give a quick thank you to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. ExpressVPN is an incredible service that enables unrestricted access to all parts of the internet while keeping you safe and secure. With forces like hackers, spyware, and slow internet speeds breathing down your neck, ExpressVPN is able to encrypt and hide your IP address, making it look like you're in a different part of the world, preventing hackers from creeping in and stealing your information when you're connected to unencrypted networks like at airports, hotels, and coffee shops. It's super easy. All it takes is a literal press of a button and can be accessed on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Something that I love about ExpressVPN actually comes in handy now more than ever. It gives you way more shows and movies on streaming. Case in point, if I change my VPN location to the UK, suddenly I have Rick and Morty and Final Space. That is not in America. Even with YouTube, sometimes videos are region locked, and ExpressVPN allows me to bypass that with no hassle. ExpressVPN is the fastest VPN in the market, with glowing reviews, 24/7 customer service, and easy access. And you can get 3 months free with a 12-month plan only by clicking this link in the description. expressvpn.com/theroundtable. Again, this free 3 months is in addition to the 12-month plan at expressvpn.com/theroundtable. Take back your internet privacy today. And we can't talk about Netflix animation without talking about their biggest success story, Bojack Horseman.
What have you been doing since the show's cancellation 18 years ago?
That's a great question, Charlie.
Step back from the title of adult animation, okay? Bojack Horseman is one of the most important television series of all time, period. I would argue that it stands with the greats and has a place in history. Especially since the show ended, it is now solidified and can start becoming part of cartoon history in general. The show about a washed-up sitcom horse trying to maintain relevancy in current-day Hollywood and pop culture does not sound like a success story on paper, but it's just so weird that it worked. And Bojack Horseman now stands as one of the most beloved and notable faces of modern adult animation. It stands for what animation can look like in our current age, and it pushed the boundaries so far for other shows to follow in. I mean, there's so much to say about Bojack, I don't even know where to start.
Chapter 1.
The reason it works so well is because it managed to hit that sweet spot between critical and commercial success. And it wasn't a hit right away. It may be one of the most successful early Netflix originals, but I only heard of Bojack through word of mouth. And that's because the show is just that good. It got people talking. Netflix recommended it to me and I thought it looked stupid. This is like back in 2013. Now we're living in a post-Bojack world, and it changed a lot of things. Bojack managed to get more successful every year, as every season added to the last, becoming darker and more emotionally complex as the show went on, telling complicated human stories that they couldn't dream of pulling off in the beginning of the show's run. Bojack didn't just stagnate with all of its season renewals, it challenged itself on where it could go and what it could talk about, making it not only an extremely cathartic watch, but also an incredibly difficult one. As you watch Bojack get worse and better and worse and better, along with the people around him all developing their own lives. Not to mention the fact that the premise of a critique on Hollywood and celebrity culture ended up being the most relevant thing they could possibly talk about, as the show aired right alongside things like the Me Too movement and all of the other massive changes that have been happening in Hollywood since it premiered.
Wait, so I'm not in the movie at all?
Well, yeah, not technically, but Computer You is giving the performance of your career.
Bojack became a mouthpiece for those things. It became one of the most important shows in that aspect. And that's because it handled these issues and its satire on them extremely well. So there's more than enough reasons to watch Bojack if you haven't. And it started adult animation strong on Netflix, paving the road for other shows to follow, like Tuca and Birdie, even though Netflix canceled that technically. They also canceled Bojack too, in a move that surprised a lot of people. I'm not here to debate whether Bojack ended too soon or too early. In my opinion, I'm glad the series had a definite end and didn't just trail on forever. But there's even talks of a spin-off happening right now, so I'm not sure what's gonna happen. But Bojack is only as strong as its individual parts, and that's why this show is gonna have such a legacy. Bojack's crew. The alumni from the show will and already are going off and making incredible things. Tuca and Birdie is just the start. There will never be another show like Bojack, period, but the talented people that worked on the show will go and shape television as a whole for years to come. And that's why it's so impactful. It also proved as a pretty big deal because it managed to cross the streaming line and even aired on Comedy Central for a little bit, proving that streaming original shows have what it takes to stand up with the big boys on primetime television. If you somehow have missed Bojack, you definitely should watch it, and you probably will at some point. It is a critical darling and will be remembered for generations to come, and it changed what adult animation could talk about and what it could look like. Bojack wasn't always funny, it wasn't always happy, but most importantly, it wasn't always offensive. It didn't handle adult problems, it handled human problems. Homer Simpson's a funny alcoholic. Bojack's a real alcoholic, and that's a lot harder to watch. It's just crazy that a show about a talking horse ended up showing us the most about ourselves.
Hey guys, I'm sorry you kids had to see that.
Yeah, that was really f***ed up.
And it's gonna hurt for a while. But here's how you deal with it. You just shove it down. Keep shoving till it goes away.
But his face was...
I know, Princess, just keep shoving.
We'll take you for ice cream.
Look, if you're a fan of stand-up, chances are you know Bill Burr. He has a pretty distinct voice, but you may not be as familiar with his original series, the Netflix animated sitcom F is for Family. This is a unique take on the dysfunctional family dynamic and focuses on Frank Murphy, a Vietnam vet father, trying to raise his children during the 70s. Now, I am a huge Bill Burr fan, but when I first saw F is for Family, I wasn't too excited about it. It kind of looked average. But boy, was I wrong. Because as I watched the show, I realized that it wasn't just strictly a comedy, it was borderline a family drama. It handled real issues and got dark in a lot of really deep ways. Frank's entire character is rooted in disappointment. His life is not what he wanted it to be. He's not really happy living the suburban life. Same with his wife. The whole premise is based on the fact that they kind of feel like they fell into this role and they're dealing with it. But they go into that so much more complexly than I ever thought they would. Watching these shows, I literally fell in love with these characters and I started to really care about them as I watched the show go into places that I never imagined that it would. Without spoiling anything, it gets pretty dark sometimes. There's some deaths, people die, and it proves what streaming has the advantage of: overarching narratives. F is for Family can afford to tell a story over the course of multiple episodes because the average viewer is going to binge it anyways. It's sort of like a movie segmented out. Luckily, F is for Family has had a lot of success and currently just aired its 4th season with word out on whether or not they're going to renew it for a 5th. But Netflix supporting this show allowed for the show to get better every season. The characters growing more complicated, side characters getting their own storylines and becoming more interesting. Like their neighbor. He started off kind of as a joke, he's so perfect, but later we see the reality of his life, his drug addictions, all the things I hinted on before in a comedic tone, they were able to go back and develop in an all too real way. TLDR, F is for Family is a lot deeper than you think and definitely worth a watch. Moving on to more recent animation though, Netflix hit us with their best cartoon yet, The Midnight Gospel. This is where streaming originals and Netflix in particular really shines. Nowhere else would something like The Midnight Gospel get greenlit or even be successful. This show is weird. Sure, it has pretty big names attached to it, like Pendleton Ward of Adventure Time fame, but everything about the show is just perfect for the streaming generation. And it is the most unique show to come out of Netflix or animation in general, hands down. Simply put, The Midnight Gospel is a surreal animated podcast interview show where they take clips from the Duncan Trussell Family Hour podcast and animate crazy scenarios behind it. That's literally how it started. Duncan Trussell is a comedian and podcaster, probably most famous for the Duncan Trussell Family Hour, was friends with Pendleton Ward and they knew they wanted to work on a project together, and it literally happened when he took one of the episodes of his podcast and animated a zombie apocalypse over it, which ended up being the first episode of the show. The rest is history, and the product is one of the trippiest things of all time. First of all, The Midnight Gospel is eye candy all the way through. It's beautiful in every sense of the word, but it's just so incredibly unique. Every episode is a riveting conversation about life or drugs or death, paired with equally insane animation that has nothing to do with the topic at hand, but tells its own self-contained adventure. Basically, there is a verbal story you can follow, or a visual story you can follow. A great example would be the first episode where they talk about the legalization of drugs while you watch them survive a zombie apocalypse. Now, I can't tell if these were all taken directly from the podcast or if they had people people ADR lines because some of the lines fit the scenario too well.
And so we follow the sweetness down.
Is she in labor?
Yeah, she's like...
Okay, all right, okay.
But either way, a majority of this is just their arbitrary conversations being animated to a completely different scenario, and it always works. Not only that, but this seemingly one-off show still managed somehow to have an overarching plot, focusing on Clancy, neglecting his responsibilities, and alluding to a deeper family problem. In fact, one of my favorite episodes of the season has to be the one with no interview, where Clancy is trying to fix his universe simulator. Their creative way of explaining how he's talking to all these different people and all these different worlds every episode. If you're a procrastinator or somebody who neglects looming problems, like me, then you will relate to this story so much, and every episode will leave you in awe. You'll often find yourself juggling between paying attention to the conversation or getting lost in the visuals. And often I found myself tuning back into one or the other and finding them in a completely different place than they were when I tuned out. And this is one of the few shows that has basically unlimited rewatch potential, because every time I rewatch one of these episodes, I understand it a little bit more and I see so much more than I did the first time. The episodes range from funny to deep to emotionally moving. Like the final episode, which included an interview Duncan had with his now dead mother, recorded before she died. You will cry.
There's no way to stop the heartbreak. What do you do about that?
You cry. You cry.
All of this leads up into a perfect, ambiguous ending. This season is just airtight perfect. Now, the Midnight Gospel isn't a massive show right now, but it's growing a pretty dedicated fan base. Right now, most of its fan base seems to be the stoner crowd and the YouTube lo-fi crowd. I'm sure there's an overlap there. A lot of people that watch the Joe Rogan podcast, but I love them all, and hopefully they love this show. My favorite thing is just putting it on for somebody who has no idea what to expect, because they're always entertained and they're always blown away. It has that power. Season 2 is not yet confirmed, okay, but it's definitely demanded. And even if it doesn't, this season does more than enough to deserve a watch. Even if you're not the biggest fan of animation, you can literally listen to it and be just as interested. It's one of the most unique and hard to explain cartoons that I've seen in such a long time. If you haven't seen The Midnight Gospel, you're missing out. Next up, the Netflix original with the most clout in my opinion is Disenchantment, as this is a Matt Groening original. I knew this was going to be a big deal when they announced it, and it's definitely a big deal for Netflix. I mean, this is Matt Groening. He created the biggest cartoon, often regarded as the greatest television show of all time, though you can debate that. Do it in the comments, be nice. Now, honestly, out of all of Matt Groening's massive hits, this is the show I've definitely seen the least of, but that's definitely my fault as it has so much going for it. This show, a parody take on fairy tales, follows Bean, an alcoholic princess, traveling with her naive partner Elfo, and her personal demon Lucy, voiced by the infamous Eric Andre, arguably my favorite part of the show. It's so weird to see Eric Andre doing a normal role. I haven't seen it all the way through, but from what I've seen, I've loved. That show has that classic sharp wit and clever writing, and without spoilers, does have the luxury of an ongoing story, something that The Simpsons and Futurama don't innately have. It's cool that he's trying something different, and is very much made to be on streaming. It's serialized adult animation that's still a comedy before anything else. Although there are still other serialized shows like Bojack, it's still arguably grounded in conflict most viewers would find interesting, the hardships and morality of those in the entertainment industry. Disenchantment, on the other hand, is in a fantasy setting that innately makes it a lot less grounded than most of these shows, which may have affected its success. I mean, if you're not into fantasy, you would immediately write this show off. That's why I feel like it hasn't found a massive audience as of now. Fantasy still feels pretty stigmatized to me as a genre, more so than sci-fi or the classic American sitcom. Still, it's clear that a lot of passion and work is being put into Disenchantment that makes it worth a watch. And it's been renewed, so it's definitely doing well financially. Hopefully that's not just off Groening's name alone and the show itself. It's sad because I don't see enough people talking about it, including myself. I'm guilty of this. It doesn't get brought up a lot in the overall conversation of adult animation right now, though I feel like it deserves to be. It's funny and unique, and if you have a Netflix subscription, definitely worth a watch. If given the opportunity, I would gush about Love, Death, and Robots until I physically could not talk anymore. This has been the most exciting thing in animation, in my opinion, to come out in years, and although it has been successful and a lot of people have been talking about it, I feel like it deserves so much more. In my opinion, it's at least the most underrated cartoon on Netflix. If you've never seen or heard about Love, Death, and Robots, this dark and brutal animated anthology series is a breath of fresh air. Every episode follows a different premise in a different universe, a different story, and a different animation style. That's why it's so hard to talk about broadly, because every episode is so different from the next. It's a grab bag full of beautiful animation. And sure, the episodes aren't always perfect, but they're always interesting. Some of them are straight up masterpieces. These episodes range from space farmers in mech suits, to robots investigating post-apocalyptic Earth, to Topher Grace looking in his freezer. Yes, that's real.
The reason that bad things happen to you is because you're a dumbass.
And they're not always dark. Some episodes are about yogurt taking over, but they have that deep-rooted sci-fi vibe that always gives me the chills in a way that I can't explain. They're always kind of freaky, and when the show wants to be dark, oh, they definitely can be. Some of these episodes are straight up scarring. Not in an overtly scary way, but in a way that I am up at night because I can't sleep because I'm thinking about it. It psychologically affects you. People are always pushing for more mature adult animation, but it's right here, right in front of you. And luckily, it's getting a season 2. I mean, it's literally Black Mirror animated. How could you not love that? And look, if you're a fan of animation, especially with the artistic expression of it all, its role as an art form, this show is eye candy. To not watch it would be a crime. You are depriving yourself of so much beautiful animation. From 2D to hyper-realistic to even live-action mixed media, it's all here. So, that being said, I can't pitch it any more than that. My gushing is over. If you haven't seen Love, Death, and Robot, get on it now. You will not be disappointed. The best part is, you don't even have to start with episode 1. And it doesn't matter anyways, because Netflix shuffles the episode order. It's a weird thing, I don't understand it. But I want to see more storytelling like this in the future. I love anthology series, I love experimentation, and this is experimental as it gets, which is why it deserves a watch. It's another show that I don't see get brought up enough in adult animation, so if you're interested, definitely check it out. Next up is one of the most unique Netflix originals, Castlevania. Unlike Disenchantment or most on this list, Castlevania isn't a comedy, not even remotely. It's serialized and fantasy, but it's action-oriented, it's bloody, it's philosophical, and most of all, it's honest. Following Trevor Belmont, monster hunter who's the last of his clan, Alucard, the son of Dracula, and Sypha, a powerful spellcaster, the series starts out as a quest to slay Dracula, who's sworn mournful vengeance on humanity for the death of his wife Lisa. A very boring name for that scenario. Like most things on Netflix, Castlevania is one of the most unique originals, even beyond the realm of animation. On a production level, it's going to be crazy to the average viewer that this anime-influenced video game adaptation manages to look this good, emulating anime that well, and was also made in Texas.
What's so great about dumb old Texas?
Especially since most of the Netflix original anime on the service is actually just anime made elsewhere and licensed by Netflix. This is one of the closer examples of what one would imagine Netflix original anime to actually be. But beyond how it's made and how it looks, it has substance. The characters are extremely layered and fleshed out, especially the villains. There's so many details that take multiple rewatches to notice and appreciate, and it always carries a strong sense of nuance when tackling its adult themes. Not to mention that score, mwah! It's a huge Netflix success, and the latest season made it into the Netflix top 10. It always meets positive reception, and renewals are never too far behind a new season release. It's a great look for adult animation, a great representation of what adult animated series can look like, and hopefully continues bringing more to the table. Now, that being said, we've gushed about the critical darlings on Netflix. Let's talk about its more controversial, but equally as important adult animated shows. And we couldn't talk about this without, of course, mentioning Paradise PD. Now, I haven't entirely made up my mind about this show, but I definitely want to talk about it. From the creators of Brickleberry, this Netflix original focuses on a comedically horrible police department and all the antics that they get into. Now, right off the bat, this show is pretty polarizing. The opening scene is him shooting his dad's testicles off, and they show it all. And that actually ends up being a pretty big part of the story. I'm going to speak as objectively as possible, but Paradise PD is not my cup of tea. I'm just not a fan of adult animated shows like this. I didn't want to typecast it based on how it looks, because at first glance, this kind of looks like a Seth MacFarlane knockoff type deal, but it's far from it. The creators of Brickleberry really have their own unique style and bring a lot to the table in terms of animation. I was definitely proven wrong there. And there's no use in being overly critical about a goofy adult animated show that's obviously meant to be raunchy. If you're here for these types of jokes, you'll definitely have a good time, and a lot of people have. Paradise PD has a pretty huge fan base, and just released its second season with a third probably on the way. And despite my inherent dislike for this type of show, there were so many jokes that snuck up on me, and it's pretty much literally impossible to watch without laughing. Plus, the plot about being a cop when no one wants to be one is kind of gold in my opinion, and is only aging weirder every single day. But that being said, every so often there is a joke that sends me absolutely groaning, but I feel like it wears those proudly like a badge. It knows what it wants to be, and it does it unapologetically. Sometimes it gives off the vibe of being offensive just to be offensive, but there's a whole audience of people that love that style of comedy, and for them this show is perfect. Seriously, Paradise PD is very much a show that's a lot bigger than people realize, without it being a huge staple of Netflix. A lot of casual Netflix viewers see the show that looks kind of Family Guy-ish, and because they laugh at Family Guy, they must think this will be just as good. To have a bigger discussion about it though, is this holding back adult animation, or is it just a harmless show? I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at this. At the end of the day, it's an adult cartoon. Not every show that gets made that's adult and animated is gonna be Bojack Horseman, okay? Every so often, there's gonna be one that's purely goofy, purely raunchy, and sort of silly, and just extremely dumb comedy. It's kind of a genre on its own. Sure, there are a lot of shows I could compare this style to, but at the same time, that's not really my place. It's all kind of subjective. I understand the angle that it could be holding back animation because it's keeping adult animation in that box that it's sort of been in for so long, but I think there's something to be said about the variety of adult animation that can be produced, and some shows can just be a silly good time. Still, if you're a fan of stuff like this, you've probably already seen Paradise PD, so I don't need to tell you to watch it, but if you haven't and this looks interesting to you, definitely check it out. And finally, we could not talk about Netflix adult animation without mentioning one of its biggest and most infamous successes, Big Mouth. I remember when this trailer first came out, and I thought this show was gonna send people to jail. And as it's come out and had multiple seasons under its belt, it's definitely one of the most divisive modern adult cartoons. It's also one of the weirdest success stories in all of animation. I mean, it's renewed up to season 6 and has been a massive hit for Netflix. I mean, it's even getting a spin-off. It's got a pretty simple premise. It uses surrealist storytelling to show the awkward teenage journey of puberty and growing up in general, not restraining itself from going into every awkward detail and showing it all. It gets away with a lot more than I thought was legally possible, and honestly, there's times where Big Mouth makes me extremely uncomfortable. It shows nudity, sexual acts, and plenty of other raunchy stuff, while still centering on a middle school cast. In fact, the show itself jokes about how if it wasn't animation, they couldn't get away with it. But somehow, this became one of the biggest Netflix originals, period. The show does owe a lot of its success to its star-studded cast. It also likely has the South Park appeal of young kids swearing and doing inappropriate antics. I guess these stories just struck a chord with the audience. I mean, everyone's gone through this, I guess. It's cool to see somebody telling it like it is, although it's debatable whether or not they push the envelope a little too far. No, don't get me wrong, the show isn't only successful because of what it's about. I'm gonna be honest, Big Mouth is really funny, and that's because it has a lot of very talented writers, and was co-created by Nick Kroll, who is one of my favorite comedians in my opinion. He's always done really weird stuff like this, and his style of comedy is so unique, it's definitely apparent here, especially in characters like Coach Steve. In fact, if you're a fan of Kroll, there's no way you haven't watched Big Mouth. He voices like the entire cast. And in my opinion, the cast is its saving grace. The writing's really funny, but the delivery of its cast is just impeccable. Seriously, this show is really funny, and as much as I'm against it at times, I can't watch it without cracking up every so often. I mean, it really sneaks up on me. It's got John Mulaney. How could you hate it? On top of that, it also manages to tell its own overarching narratives throughout the seasons, and it manages to have incredibly real moments, like Jesse's parents' divorce. And I'm not saying having serious moments automatically makes a show good, okay? I mean, Family Guy's had serious moments, but I'm not gonna call that show a drama, okay? But trying to watch this show unbiasedly, I ended up really feeling for these characters and getting invested in the story, and the fact that it was able to get real when it needed to, while also balancing being incredibly weird and uncomfortable, led to a show that I didn't entirely love or hate, but definitely left an impact on me. And as much as my opinion flip-flops on it, I'm being 100% honest here, I'm not a perfect reviewer. I always check back in for the new season, because I genuinely want to see what it's gonna be. As disturbing as it is, it's always interesting. In a way, Big Mouth is the next step after Family Guy and South Park, as it does what made those shows big, but at a higher level that can only happen on streaming. Before, it was, man, Family Guy does what The Simpsons wouldn't do. And now it's, man, Big Mouth does what Family Guy literally can't do. They can't show this on cable. Arguably, I don't know if they could show it, period, but they get away with it, so it's okay. Now, honestly, this is the one show I feel like I shouldn't have to tell you to see because a lot of people have. It's definitely not underrated. But if you somehow haven't and this sounds interesting, or if you just want to hear more of Coach Steve's terrifying voice, check out Big Mouth. Well guys, there you have it. Those were some of the Netflix original animated shows that I feel really stand out. This is a really interesting time for animation and television as a whole. Streaming is pushing things in a different direction entirely. It's absolutely no hold bars with what they can say or talk about or get away with. There's no more censorship, you don't have to appeal to a mass market. Streaming allows cult shows to prosper, and ideas that could never have worked anywhere else find success. It's pushing adult animation in a really interesting direction, and I feel like it's going to normalize the genre as a whole. It already has by giving us some of the most unique shows we've ever seen, but it's really breaking down the box of what it means to be an adult animated show. It doesn't just have to be cartoons that swear anymore. These are real complex stories, and they're giving a chance for experimental animation to shine too. Overall, I think it's an incredible thing. But as always, I want to know what you guys think about all of this. Do you watch Netflix animation? Do you not? Let us know in those comments down below, tweet to us for Roundtable vids, or me at an email. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the Roundtable for more incredible cartoon content. As always guys, I'm Nemo, this was an animation discussion video, and I will see you next time. Peace.